So I was recently reflecting on my path in the programming industry. I was thinking about my learning process and how there were so many things that if I had known at the time would have vastly sped up my learning process. And so I thought it might be a good idea to write that list down and share it with anyone who's maybe struggling to learn right now or looking for some extra motivation to keep at it. And so I created my list of what you didn't know that you needed to know. And I will say, I'll be talking about it in the context of the front end, but I think a lot of this pertains to the greater programming industry as well as just learning anything in general. Well, some of it. The first thing is learn principles, Google syntax. Now this doesn't mean you're going to get your first job still not knowing how to get the length of an array, but the point is that learning to program is learning logic. A programming language is just a tool, so conventions are going to differ from language to language, but the vast majority of the time, patterns are not language specific. And so if you can start to understand how data is treated in one language, you'll be better equipped to learn more languages and continue to improve in the language you're studying. And so my main tip for this is to start diagramming your projects. Put boxes for what the information is, how it gets moved, what's updating the screen, and you'll start to get a better sense of what you're actually writing. You might see that you have duplicate boxes in certain areas, and that it might be a good idea to actually combine those into one spot so that you can be a little more efficient. And I think doing this will help speed up your learning process, because when it comes to building maybe a more complicated application, you start to be able to extrapolate specific principles outward and see how they could apply to more complex situations. So, my next tip, that level is never apparent. For some reason, I just always thought there was a point. You get there, and then you're comfortable, and you can feel good. You can go to work, and you're fine. And that could not be further from the truth. Now, don't get me wrong. There is eventually a point where you don't have to keep learning, but I don't think you'll feel good about it. Learning is just a part of the programming industry. And so if you don't continue to learn, you're generally going backwards. There are new conventions that you want to keep up with, and becoming complacent about your learning is never a good idea. I will say though, when it comes to assessing how much you've learned, it's also never really apparent while it's happening. It's not until you look back at where you were, say, 6 months ago, look at the code and realized, God, I never would have written that now. And so even when it doesn't feel like it, a lot of the times you are getting better just by keeping active. So my main tip for this is to schedule structured learning. I think it was Aristotle who said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. So if you want to become an excellent developer, make it a habit to keep learning. If you learn a little bit every day or every week, all of that adds up. And maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in a week or a month, but eventually you'll get to the point where you're head and shoulders above everyone else, maybe at your company, because you've focused on continually learning. Now, my next tip is that, yes, understanding the full stack is important. And maybe this is super obvious to some people. I just always understood it as the front end is separate from the back end. So if you want to be a great front end developer, just drill down on the front end. And if you want to be a great back end developer, just drill down on the back end. And while there is some truth to that, there's also a great need to understand the other side. So if you're a back end developer, understanding the front end. And if you're a front end, understanding at least the architecture of the back end and the general idea of how things are working. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to learn to code the back end. While I do think that is a good thing, I don't think that's necessarily something that every front-end dev has to do. But I will say that the best front-end developer is able to work with a back-end developer, understand the architecture of your system, and be able to hold your own in a conversation about how information should be structured when it's delivered to the front end. Being able to understand when things would be more efficiently done on your server versus on the client side will definitely help you stick out as a top-tier front-end engineer. And so I would say my main tip for this is to do a few node projects. What this will do is help you start to understand at least how the backend works. Even if the company you're at is using Java or C#, and even if you don't intend to eventually become a node developer full-time, it's still a good idea to be able to understand principles that go back and forth between the front end and the back end. Now the next thing is top-level programmers aren't just the smart people. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want this to be some kumbaya, everyone can be great. No, that's probably not true. Can everyone do what Mark Zuckerberg did? Probably not. Bill Gates? Probably not. But the point is that while the high IQ individuals definitely have an advantage when it comes to getting to that top level, it's by no means exclusively a super smart person club. The best engineers at the top of an organization are generally a mix of both the super smart people as well as those who kept learning and kept working hard. I think it's easy to forget that a career isn't just 5 years long. Careers span many years, and so those individuals who keep learning and sticking at it have the opportunity to work their way up as well. And trust me, there are plenty of very smart developers who are lazy and don't go anywhere. They get complacent and comfortable where they're at, and they are fine staying where they're at, just treading water. And so my main tip for this one is to set goals. And not just set goals, write them down. Writing goals helps to create some accountability. And I will say, don't write goals based on where someone else was when they were 25 or 30 or 35. All you can compare yourself to is yourself yesterday, not someone else today. And so my final item on the list is no. Learning never does end. But caveat to this is that it does get more interesting. A lot more interesting. Now I think there's something that everyone can agree on, and that there is definitely a point once you get past the honeymoon period of learning to program where it just sucks to learn. Things aren't new anymore, they're not exciting anymore, and you're just learning things where the person teaching it seems like it's so obvious, but you're just struggling to understand it. You can eventually get to the point where you start to find your own niche, maybe a specific part of programming that you just think is super interesting. Maybe it's a specific video web API dealing with the webcam or audio. Whatever it might be, you have the ability to start really drilling down on your own interests. At this point, you might find that there are some jobs in the area that are paying a lot more for someone who has that skill set, just because there aren't as many people who have that ability. And trust me, when you get to this point, the learning is a lot more fun. All of a sudden, it's not trying to understand how someone made X. It's trying to architect how you're going to make X. It might be a new idea that no one's done. And while there are plenty of developers who theoretically could build it, you're the one who had the idea, and now you get to build it. And so my main tip for this is to start thinking about where you see yourself in 5 or 10 years in the developer industry. It's helpful to think about the field you see yourself in, because starting to think about that kind of stuff can help influence how you're learning. It can help influence the goals you're setting, and it might influence your learning schedule. And more than anything else, it can help you get through those plateaus. Knowing that there's something that you want to get to rather than just being a coder is something that I know plenty of developers, including myself, have relied upon to keep working hard at learning. So, I hope you found this helpful. Hopefully, you're able to take some of these things, or at least one of them, and let it influence how you're learning right now. So, if you did find this useful, feel free to subscribe for more videos like this, as well as JavaScript related videos, both industry and learning. And I hope to see you soon. Thanks.